Hi, I'm Harvey Hubbell, and this is Harvey Hubbell Show and Tell. And today, we're with my friend Kevin Bartlett, who's an international man of mystery. I don't even know what he does. I just know he does something. Who are you, and what do you do, and where are you right now?
Yeah, right now in Panama City, where I live. I've been here for a couple of years. My wife is Hondureña, so Central American. Um, Before that, we were in Honduras, San Pedro Sula for 4 years. Before that, Buenos Aires for 3 years. Before that, I was in Brussels for 15. Before that, I was in Namibia for 7 years. Before that, Vienna for 7 years. Before that, Tanzania for 5 years. And before that, in London. So I'm officially into my late hundreds now. So seems to be a long life. I don't know how, but it just keeps going and I'm just going with it. So what has taken me there, Harvey, is education, or I'd even prefer to use the term learning. I'm fascinated by learning. Much of my career for 40 years was leading international schools, Brussels, Windhoek, Dar es Salaam, Vienna. But at the same time, I was always obsessed with the idea that we were not doing a great job in education. So I started trying to work on, I guess I could call it simplifying and systematizing learning, trying to turn silos into systems. So I'm a guy who works in learning. I base myself in schools. I fly tomorrow to Bucharest. I'll teach five 90-minute lessons to ninth graders in Romania while a film crew films me and teachers observe. So I'm basically a guy who, rather like yourself, has a passion for trying to make things better for kids. And I do it through trying to design complete connected learning ecosystems to replace the broken systems that I think schools operate under.
Kevin, what was it like when you were growing up? I mean, you're a guy who cares about education. What was your schooling like? What was before schooling like for you? This had to influence you somehow. What was your schooling like when you were a kid growing up?
It's interesting, Harvey, because when I lead workshops for teachers, one of the things we do is start by building a learning culture. And part of that learning culture is to build a set of shared learning principles. And where I start is asking them to tell a story of their own schooling, very much like you've just done. So I ask them to share what I call a learning story. I actually ask them to draw the story with their non-dominant hand and then distill the story into one word and then turn the story into a message. So, dear colleagues, from my learning story, we should always remember that. So I had two contrasting experiences, and I can summarize them pretty quickly. I went to a rural elementary school in way out in the wilds of Lincolnshire in England. I came from a very poor family. It was a small school, and I really loved it. And what I loved most was one particular teacher, a guy called Frank Mitchell. And I loved the fact that I knew he liked me. We know that teacher-student relationships have a massive impact on learning. And he also loved nature, and he also loved story. And he would read a story to us at the end of every day. And I longed for those moments. And he would always read from a book like Old Yeller, White Fang, Swiss Family Robinson, Coral Island, wild places, wild animals. And you can see the painting behind me. I've spent my life, when I'm not working, I am a wildlife photographer. So, and I've always been drawn to exotic places. It's why I move all the time is what's the next adventure? Nueva Aventura, where are we going next? So I had a wonderful elementary education. Then I went to a secondary school that was kind of, imagine Hogwarts, but replace the magic with misery. So I remember I got to 16, I remember. I survived to 16. I took what was called A levels, kind of the equivalent of AP or the IB diploma. I handed in my first history essay. I thought I was quite good at history. And the master, I remember his name vividly. His way of giving feedback and assessment was he would sit at the front and in his robes, his gown with his mortarboard, and all the boys in their black uniforms sitting at scarred wooden desks. And he would just go through the pile and read out a comment in front of all the boys. So this was my first history essay. And when he got to me, he just said in his very deep tones, Bartlett, I believe that you may have reached your intellectual ceiling. So I had a delightful primary school that really guided me into a world of nature and travel and adventure and mystery. And then I experienced what it's like to be crushed and humiliated by a teacher and made to feel you simply can't do something. Um, so I failed that course and I didn't even retake it. I left underqualified from high school. And I think, although I wasn't thinking about it at the time when I chose education for a career, that was more pragmatic. Much of my work has been shaped by what a great teacher can do for a kid and what a terrible teacher can do to a kid. So I'm spending my time partly fueled by inspiration and partly fueled by indignation, I think, is we cannot treat children that way. You cannot close doors to kids. We are door openers by profession. One reason I love the work you do on literacy, you open doors to kids that are otherwise closed. So I had the good and the bad of an education in Northern England. It very much shaped the way I have spent my working life.
Well, you share so much of your life, and I read something about if uh, traveling is like reading a book, and if you don't travel, you only read page one.
It's I don't know. I love to read as well, and but yes, I don't know. My the rest of my family, my brother lives 30 miles from where we were born, and I can barely stay 30 minutes in one place. I don't know why. Same genes, but a very different take on life.
That's uh, that's that's beautiful and interesting. And I have a question about teachers. What makes a good teacher?
I think it takes three things. You need to know the kids, you need to know how people learn, and you do need to know the content. You need to have the conceptual framework in your head of what you're teaching. And I think it's as simple as that. And the most important is know the kids. And it's hard. It's hard, I should say. The teaching job is hard. A lot of my life is I have a presentation called Debureaucratizing Teaching. We've made schooling so complex, so bureaucratic, and so constraining for teachers. One of the many reasons why they're flooding away from our profession. But fundamentally, know the kids, know learning theory, and know the essence of what you're teaching. And then learn from experience. Just, although it's interesting, I've just done some amazing work with two of the youngest teachers I've ever met in my life. I've designed a new kind of curriculum for the learning process, a whole scope and sequence, pre-K through university, for learning to learn. I'm just seeing it put into practice by two young teachers in Panama who are barely out of college. To me, they look like they're barely out of school. Because I would say that then, on top of those three things, experience and reflecting on experience, as John Dewey said, they say we learn from experience, but we don't. We learn from reflecting on experience. So, three basics and a lifetime of reflection, I would say, make a good teacher.
Wow. Okay, what's the best invention ever?
Um, I'm going to be selfish and say the digital camera because I love wildlife photography. I just came down from Bella Vista Cloud Forest in Ecuador. I was up there with my wife Marta for 5 days. So when it comes to a personal choice, digital photography transformed my life as a wildlife photographer. Um, Other than that, I can think of a lot of bad inventions. I'm actually intrigued by AI, to be honest, and I know people are scaremongering, but in recent times, I have seen that accelerate the work a teacher can do to the point where what I would consider to be impossible almost, to be the perfect teacher, is drawn into the realms of possibility. I use AI all the time. It's enabled me to do things like write a curriculum for learning to learn. So I'm very pro anything that takes the intellectual grunt work out of teaching to allow teachers to spend their time understanding every kid they teach, liking that kid, finding the zone of proximal development, we call it, for that kid. So anything that can speed up the work of preparation and assessment and that kind of thing, I'm very much in favor of. I can go along with the scary nature of AI, but I do think AI has made great teaching possible, because it can take a lot of the, you know, get this great model ready for kids to deconstruct it. You can do that in 5 minutes with AI. It would have taken you a couple of days to design it yourself. You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a good positive way to embrace AI. Well, you and I are just two passengers on this planet, and there's all this stuff going on. Another thing we have in common, and it's probably inappropriate for me to say this, is where we read our books. Where we read our books. I know your bathtub is by a window. Not that I look in at you. I don't want you to think I look in at you, but you read your books in a bathtub, don't you?
I thought I recognized that guy on the window cleaning trolley.
That was
Yeah,
me.
it was the glass.
It was
The glasses
it was the
gave him.
glasses. It was the
Yeah,
glasses.
it's actually, I think it's really interesting where ideas come from and when ideas come. Darwin had something called the sand walk. It was a circle in his garden, and he would walk around the circle, and he had a pile of pebbles by the side of it, and with every circuit he would kick one to the side, and that's where he came up with the more refined version of the theory of evolution. And I've seen that. Many people I know have a peaceful place where they go to switch off, and then the brain keeps working. The brain is still functioning, and that's where I solve a lot of problems and come up with many ideas. Is looking out of the Pacific Ocean at wheeling flocks of pelicans and magnificent frigate birds, and thinking, oh, that's how that works. Always keep a notepad by the bath, a soggy notepad, and a waterproof pen and things. But there's a whole theory and a whole empirical confirmation of that theory that the brain will solve our problems if we work hard enough, think hard enough, and then give it some peace. It's one reason why what we do with high school kids is crazy in some high schools. You know, a 50-minute lesson, run to the next one, run to the next one, run to the next one. They have no processing time. And we never teach them how to process information anyway, which is why I've designed this new learning to learn curriculum. To me, I'm trying to get beyond. There's a wonderful business book called The Knowing Doing Gap. And it's a cousin of that is the saying doing gap. It's kind of, well, in our school, parents, don't worry. It's not about what children learn. It's about how they learn. We teach children how to learn. And I think, no, you don't. No, you don't. I found that myself teaching my own high school kids in Brussels. They didn't know how to take notes, for example. And I thought, that's my job. That's my job as a school director, is teaching kids how to learn. So for me, I'm always looking for simplicity, Harvey. And I'm always looking for logical if-then syllogisms. If we think it's important to teach kids how to learn, then that becomes curriculum. And it has time in the curriculum. And we know when we're doing it. And we know if they're learning it. So ideas like that come to me in the quiet moments when I'm almost looking away from the problem. I happen to do a lot of looking away in the bath. And believe me, if you came into the bathroom, you would want to look away as well.
Well, I have a big stack of books, and so I'm always looking in there, and it's jolting me into thinking about other things. And I was thinking, like, that's the whole idea of what you said. It's like when people want to sleep on it. Let me sleep on it for a minute, and
Yes,
you're resting the brain as well, right, my friend?
exactly that. You're resting, but the brain isn't. And it's doing the work for you if you give it time. Yeah.
What are your superpowers, Kevin?
When I start workshops, Harvey, I do a short warm-up called the one-line job description. I ask people to tell me what they do for a living, but they may not reference their job title, and they've only got one sentence. And the one I model for them is I try to bring clarity to complexity. So if I have any superpower at all, it's that ability to look at seemingly very complex situations and say, yes, but when you think about it, it's really this, this, and this. We've done that with learning. I can give you an example if we have the time.
Sure.
So 70% of educational changes fail. statistically, just factual, because I still think facts have some value. Um, I think one of the reasons why is people tackle a part of a problem, but not the whole problem. But the parts of the problem are interdependent on each other. So, for example, uh, Common Core will design a curriculum, but the teacher training is inadequate. And even if the training is okay, they don't have the tools. And then they won't change the accreditation system to match so that schools are being held accountable for something they're no longer doing. Or they don't change the assessment. So everybody talks about competency-based learning or school of the future or critical thinking, but then we assess for recall. So I thought the only way I can do this is if I deal with all parts of the system. And I'll say this briefly because it's a long presentation in the end. So I said, you can't make learning happen until you've decided what it is. A lot of this, I mean, I don't know who first said it, but I like the phrase, the painful discovery of the blindingly obvious. So one of those painful discoveries is hard to make learning happen if you haven't decided what it is. So our first question was, what is learning? What is the learning process? And I call that define. So we defined the learning process as the consolidation and extension of conceptual understanding, competency, and character. And those three things interweave like the DNA of learning. The reason we picked that is we read about what experts do. Experts are experts in the ideas of their field and how they relate to each other. Experts are highly skilled, and we sure as hell need expert human beings right now. So conceptual, competency, character. And then we developed a simple pedagogy. You cannot scale complexity. We've always striven for simplicity. So we developed a simple pedagogy for conceptual learning, competency learning, character learning. And then we said, well, you can't learn in a vacuum. We need the context of good content, illustrative content. So that gave us a second question, define what's worth learning. Another blindingly obvious. Hard to have a shared direction if you don't have a shared destination. So we created something called the portrait of a learner, the portrait of a graduate with 6 human capacities. And our job is to build those human capacities to the full in the kids and in ourselves. So define learning, design learning, and then everybody learns differently. You know, you learned very differently. I learned differently, and I know your passion for literacy. I know your passion for neurodiversity. So our third question was, how does everyone access learning? And then how do you teach for that? But we didn't say, how do you teach for that? We said, how do you build learning cultures? How do we build a learning culture in every classroom? We call that deliver. I don't like the term deliver, but I do like alliteration. So that's a kind of compromise. And then how do you know if they've learned anything? That question was, how do the learners provide evidence of learning? We call that demonstrate. So we created the framework for a fully connected system, which is process-based. Define, design, diversify, deliver, demonstrate. And what I do all over the world is bring that system into schools. And we've populated those 5Ds with compelling, innovative solutions to some of the current problems that have plagued education. A lot of my work now, Harvey, is what are the biggest dilemmas that schools face? Can I provide a solution? A friend of mine said to me, you know, Kevin, it's hard to work on school, in school. And I think that's right. Heads of school are bombarded with all kinds of stuff on a daily basis. Their calendar never looks like what their day looks like. And I thought, well, I'm no longer in school, and now I have time to reflect on 50 years of experience. I'm going to nail down each of the biggest problems I see schools facing and present to our profession potential solutions. For example, right now, we're running 2 parallel sets of 5 webinars on what we've designed called the collective growth system, because I don't believe teacher evaluation works. Research says it doesn't work. So we've created an entirely new model for teacher growth based on culture building first, collective efficacy, not running around with useless checklists into teachers' rooms for, half an hour a week or something. So I guess my superpower would be, and I know it's a long answer, even though I'm claiming simplicity, I try to bring clarity to complexity, So I try to think in terms of systems. I'll finish with a quote from a brilliant guy, W. Edwards Deming, who said, who's the guy who created total quality management. He transformed the Japanese car industry after the Second World War. It's the reason why America's roads are full of Japanese cars. He said, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. And I think a lot of the time these days, if you said to a school, but what exactly, how do you go about learning for all these kids? I don't think you would get a succinct answer. So I'm always trying to find the simple process that will be scalable, that will bring clarity to complexity, so that change might actually have a chance of working.
Well, change is constant, and I just want to go back. We had this pandemic a couple years ago. I don't know if you remember, and in the great United States of America, we found out that because you put you're dealing with your boss, you're doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and you go downstairs, you make breakfast, you put some food in a brown paper bag for your kid, and you open the door. There's a yellow school bus. Put the kid on the school bus, and somebody teaches your kid how to read. But what we found out, there was this pandemic. And so everybody had to stay home, and we found out that our kids couldn't read, and we saw how bad it was, and there was nobody. They weren't planning on having a pandemic that day, so there wasn't a teacher plan. But you're trying to work through teaching kids on computers when they're at their homes, and that's when people just realized, wow, we're not doing very good here. And the kids can't read, and we have a problem, and I think that out of the pandemic, we really learned a lot of people knew there was a literacy crisis, but I think the average parent knew that there was a literacy crisis when they saw how the children weren't learning, they weren't engaging. Where were you during the pandemic, and what did you learn?
The same as you, basically. I was locked down in Panama. I got caught away from home for 3 months on my own without my wife, which was difficult. And then I was running my workshops online. But the work you're doing, again, it's one of those painful discovery, the blindingly obvious, Harvey. If you want kids to learn to read, you have to teach them how to do it. I mean, in that sense, it's not rocket science. I now have the same, and my wife is the literacy expert in our family, and she's doing exactly what you're doing or trying to do. She's trying to do based on the science of reading and the best things she can find. She's teaching teachers in a school in Panama, literally, how to teach kids how to read. My side of that in the curricular field is I'm doing the same, but I realize they don't know how to learn, just as they don't know how to read, because nobody's teaching them. So while she's teaching kids directly how to read by teaching teachers how to teach kids, I'm trying to teach kids how to learn, because that's another thing that people assume. People assume someone's doing it. I think the work you're doing is brilliant. It's likely to have, if either of us is successful, you probably already are successful, I'm trying hard, I can have a radical impact on a kid's life. Because illiteracy, I don't want to be too controversial, but I believe it, illiteracy is an extension of a kind of slavery. If you cannot progress across social barriers because of your lack of literacy, you are just stuck for the rest of your life. And again, I don't want to get into too much politics, but there are sections of society that are perfectly happy with that, because somebody needs to do the menial work and somebody needs to have the privilege. It's very difficult to progress through life without literacy skills. You've done it, and I know you had some difficulties with reading as a kid, and maybe that extends into your adult life. But so part of my job is to break through social barriers as well as break through learning barriers. One example is one of my favorite projects, not just because I happen to like African elephants, as you can see from behind me, is a major project in Kenya with a group called SHOFCO, which stands for Shining Hope for Communities. It resonates with how you talk about your work, I think. They have 2 girls' schools already in the most deprived areas of Nairobi. My project within that is to create a new international school. So it's called Sankore International School. There's a small team of us, two Americans, me, two Kenyans, working under the Shofco umbrella. Sankore International School will have 60% fee-paying students and 40% full scholarship. Now, that obviously means a very interesting and challenging blend of socioeconomic groups in one school. We know it's going to be challenging. And I tell you, I also know we'll make lots of mistakes because when you're dealing with other people's societies, other people's cultures, you can make all kinds of assumptions. Oh, these poor kids will love the privilege of going to this school. Not necessarily. They have communities where they live. So, but somebody has to take on these socioeconomic barriers, and literacy is one of the keys to unlock those barriers and move across society. And I just believe that social mobility and diversity are really important. So I guess maybe because I came from a poor background myself, maybe that's why, but I think you and I are the same in that. I don't want to presume, but if we see disadvantage, we feel compelled to tackle it. I just feel compelled to try to make a difference for as long as I can keep working. So you're doing it in literacy, I'm doing it in the curriculum in general, but you just have to recognize that things don't happen by accident, and somebody has to step up. Somebody has to say, we're going to teach these kids to read now. And I've seen the joy. I've watched some of the videos from your work, and there's a kind of revelatory joy in those parents when the kid can read to them. And I do think that the pandemic, circling back to your actual question, made a huge difference. What I'm seeing now in all the schools I work in, Harvey, are talking about behavior problems with kids and even behavior problems with parents. I think it's somewhat down to two things: the pandemic and now accelerated by AI, because when kids realize they don't need the teacher for the information, and when they're not used to being in social groups, suddenly school doesn't feel quite as appealing to them anymore. They got used to being able to do what they want when they wanted to do it. They got used to the idea that they had to find information. Well, if all of that's true, the role of the teacher needs some redefining, because if all intelligence and information is freely available, what does the teacher bring? Now, to me, the teacher brings humanity. Michael Fullan, the brilliant Canadian thinker, said, information without relationships is never knowledge. So AI can give us certain things, but I think it has emphasized the need for human intelligence to complement artificial intelligence. That means teachers thinking differently, but it means we have to redo the system. The same guy, W. Edwards Deming, said, a bad system will beat good people every time.
Well,
Education is full of good people, but I think we have bad systems.
don't you think it changes all the time? Anyhow, I mean, go back to Socrates' day. You just go, you're walking around barefoot with a robe on, and hanging out in walking through the village, and that's schooling. That's pretty good. Hunting gathering, was kind of like was the original homeschooling. You're hanging out with, this person's a good hunter, this person's a good grower, this person's a medicine person. So how humans learn, a lot of how our schools are based now. You've heard all of this stuff. We make good factory workers. I mean, we're afraid that we make, going to what you also said earlier, we're afraid that they make good prisoners. People who hear the bells, you follow the lines, you keep your hands to yourself. And I liked what you were talking about when you were a kid growing up. That's what I enjoyed about my early schooling, is hearing a story and somebody reading the story to you. Then I wanted to be able to get into that book and being able to, I didn't realize all these books are different stories. So I guess it's always changing anyhow. So if somebody if there was educators and they wanted to find you, how would they find you, International Man of Mystery, Kevin Bartlett? How do they find you, and how can you help them? Educators.
I'm tempted to talk to you all day because I want to follow up on that idea of old learning and old systems. I'll just say one thing. We just shared in our webinar the Sanskrit definition of teachers. They had 6 names for teachers. I don't remember all the names because they're Sanskrit names. The first level of teacher is the one who provides information. The 6th level of teacher is guru, who helps the learner find their own wisdom. I'm very drawn to old knowledge systems and how they thought about teaching. And in fact, a lot of what I'm trying to do is take us back to some of the very ancient ways of thinking about the role of the teacher. That's a whole other conversation about cultures and how they think about teaching. But well, the work I do is I work with individual schools and groups of schools to bring these learning systems into their own school. We see ourselves as capacity builders in 3 areas: culture, curriculum, and community. And we are the Common Ground Collaborative. We have that website, so if people look up Common Ground Collaborative, you'll find us easily. And we're working all over the world, but still small. It's a small, agile team. My ambition is not to have thousands of schools, but ironically, it is to reach thousands of kids. So very interested in partnerships, finding other people to work with, what Margaret Wheatley called the second loop theory. We walk away from the dominant social loop. We walk away as individuals because we're tired of it or lost interest in it. We operate individually. We find each other. We form connections. We eventually become this, what she calls the second loop, a new system. So whenever I'm talking to you, Harvey, I think, yes, this is a second loop moment. We're second loopers. People with a passion, individuals with a passion who work independently and then find each other, begin to form systems that become a thing that give other people courage to walk on and join the second loop. So I always have hopes when I'm talking to friends like you that somehow we'll join forces and we'll be more powerful together.
Well, it takes a village. I mean, that goes back to the hunter gatherers. That goes back to Socrates as well. It takes a village. These are the people in my neighborhood. That's what Sesame Street taught us, I think, or maybe Mr. Rogers. I don't know, but still, Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. So it's not Mr. Rogers' schoolhouse. It's Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. You're learning by watching what other people do. And even remember, Sesame Street is a street. It's not a school. So it's out of the box thinking. It's out of the school is a box. So it's interesting when you were talking about the names for teachers. In the great United States in the Southwest, there's the Hopi and the Navajo, and they have these plateaus. They live next to each other. And there are these 2 tribes that live next to each other, and they have the name on one plateau is teacher. The name on the other plateau means horse. It's the same word. Whatever. It's the same word. One means teacher. One means horse. I mean, you wonder how these guys can ever get along, or if they ever. I mean, they just live next to each other. You can imagine what it's like, Europe and Asia and United States and Russia, and can't we all just get along? So I what I would love from you is kindergarten, first grade, before school. What does the parent? How do they prepare? Because all we're doing, because that school may or may not prepare you for the future. We don't know what the jobs are going to be. The kids that are in kindergarten right now are going to be graduating or are going to be retiring in 65 years. What kind of jobs are they going to, after that? It's going to take them a while to go through like the year 2085 or something like that. My question for you is, how do we give a child before school a good foundation to be a lifelong learner? What do the parents do? What are the advice or stars you can point us to?
I'm tempted to say find a good school, but that's not so easy. We use the same language a lot, Harvey. We talk about, we have a program we designed for early learners beginning at the age of 2. It's called Early Ground. It has the portrait of an early learner, which is kind of the early learning version of our eventual graduating portrait of a learner. That contains things like a rational problem solver, a balanced person, a compelling communicator, a respectful relationship builder. I think that learning begins as soon as the kids are in school. It actually begins, some people would say, before birth. Howard Gardner said, between the ages of 0 and 5, A child works out how the world works. And imagine that, not literally, metaphorically, carved into the as fissures in the kid's brain. That's that deep learning. How does the world work? Conceptual learning. I always build conceptual transfer. It's concepts that transfer. And he said, then they go to school after the age of 5, and education sprinkles the powder of education over that brain. On the last day of school, the kid's so pleased to be leaving, they slam the door behind them, and all the powder blows off. And they're left with the understanding of the world that a 5-year-old has. And I actually believe that. If you stop someone in the street and ask them about algebra or how electricity works, you'll get the answer a 5-year-old would give. So to me, I think the conceptual growth of a kid is most important in those early years. So we begin as we plan to continue, and we build ideas with the very youngest of kids. If anyone tells you young kids can't think conceptually, it's simply not true. They may not have the language for it. So in a nutshell, and my nutshells are pretty big nuts, I know. So we talk about foundational learning plus applied learning is balanced learning, or even, to be more pretentious about it, foundation plus application equals transformation. So in the early childhood systems I set up, part of the day is focused on science of reading, teaching kids the basics of literacy. Part of it is embedded in play-centered, transdisciplinary modules that we call playscapes, which I think is a nice way to think about a learning unit for very young kids. The first one we designed was called What Shall We Build? And it was about architecture. And if you think about it, without forcing it, because I don't believe in that, the math and science and social gathering and language of having kids build a street together, thinking of Sesame Street, build a street out of found materials together, work out, why doesn't that fit? How big would this have to be? What do we do if we disagree on the color? Why choose the color anyway? What stories would people tell who live in this building? If the building could talk, what stories would it tell us? A friend of mine in Ecuador, this lovely school of domes in Quito, had the kids paint something in the window of every one of these buildings in the street and then tell the story of that window. So if I'm a parent, I'm looking for someone who will care for my child, extend them in a human way through what we call the zone of proximal development, what they can do with help. That's from Vygotsky. Make sure they get the foundations of strong literacy and mathematical reasoning. Make sure they get to use those foundational tools in real world, engaging, authentic contexts where they're working collaboratively, working across disciplines. To me, that's a good school. It's a combination, in a sense, of the tradition of literacy with the exploration of our playscapes, that kind of, now let's go and do this stuff together, kids. So I don't know if that's the kind of answer, but that's just the way I think about early childhood.
I wish you designed a school for me to play with when I was a kid, because I'm that building the street, man, we could have a library, well, a fire department. It would work when you're a kid, but might not be good. So I appreciate that. Kevin, I'm trying to be like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I appreciate you coming and visiting me over here, and I appreciate the time. And I could listen to you all the time, and I want to visit with you all the time on these conversations, no matter where you are on the planet. And I appreciate all the good work you're doing, because you're teaching kids how to be adults or humans.
Well, thanks, Harvey. It's been great talking to you. I'll wrap it up, perhaps where I should have started, with our mission statement. We have a 2-word mission statement: becoming human. That's it. All my work now is geared towards becoming human. How do we define human capacity for kids and help everyone become the best human being they can be? So that's the kind of beginning and end of the story, becoming human.
I'm loving it. Thanks, boss. I'll see you soon, sometime soon.